Welcome to a journey back to the early 1500s, a time when brave Spanish explorers set sail across the dangerous Atlantic Ocean. This period marks the beginning of the age of exploration, driven by ambition, technology, and a thirst for the unknown. The journey across the Atlantic was perilous, fraught with massive storms, unpredictable seas, and months of uncertainty. What compelled them? The promise of gold, the pursuit of power, and the yearning for glory, all driving Spain's global ambition. The early 16th century saw some of the most determined explorers setting foot on the American continents for the first time. The core drive was simple: to find and claim new territories, expanding the Spanish crown's reach and influence. These early explorations carved out new routes, forever connecting Europe with the previously unknown lands of the Americas. The expeditions led to significant discoveries and, tragically, the beginning of European conquests across vast new territories. The Spanish encountered highly developed indigenous civilizations, leading to a collision of cultures and immense immediate change. The explorers were relentless in their search for gold, silver, and other valuable resources to send back to Spain. The discoveries had a profound and irreversible impact, fundamentally reshaping both the Americas and Europe. These events truly changed global history forever, initiating centuries of global exchange and interconnectedness. Spain established a powerful influence, claiming vast territories and establishing new colonial structures across the continents. The bravery, ambition, and consequences of these early 16th century explorations remain a crucial part of world history. The lasting legacy of these Spanish explorations can still be seen and felt today across the Americas. Spain quickly became a dominant force during the Age of Exploration, driven by a powerful combination of economic, political, and religious factors. The core motivations for Spanish exploration are often summarized as the, quote, 3 Gs: gold, glory, and God. Foremost among the Spanish objectives was the relentless quest for wealth and precious resources. Explorers sought vast quantities of gold, silver, and other mineral wealth rumored to exist in the New World, promising unimaginable riches back in Europe. This influx of wealth was essential for funding the Spanish crown's ambitions, establishing a strong economic foundation for their global empire. Beyond material wealth, the Spanish were driven by a desire for power and glory, both for their monarchy and themselves. Expanding the Spanish Empire meant increasing territory, securing trade routes, and establishing global dominance against other European powers. The legendary quote, sought personal fame and status through military victories and grand discoveries, forever etching their names into history. A third key objective was the acquisition of new territories and resources to sustain and grow the empire. Explorers sought alternative trade routes and new resources that were unavailable or scarce in Europe, like exotic spices and timbers. The newly discovered lands offered space for settlement, agricultural production, and raw material extraction, fueling Spain's prosperity. The age of Spanish exploration in the Americas profoundly shaped the culture, politics, and demography of the continents. Spanish colonization left a lasting impact, introducing language, religion, and architectural styles that are still evident today across North and South America. Ultimately, the Spanish came seeking gold, glory, and new lands, objectives that fundamentally drove the colonization of the Americas. Imagine the vast, unknown expanse of the Caribbean Sea, suddenly broken by the sight of massive Spanish galleons. This marked the start of a seismic change in the Americas. The Caribbean coast became the initial stage for European exploration. But where exactly did these explorers first set foot? After months at sea, the sight of land brought both relief and anticipation. The Spanish ships approached the lush, tropical coastlines, fundamentally altering the region forever. The initial landing sites were crucial, providing safe harbor and fresh water. These points became the anchors for future colonial endeavors, often dictated by geography and indigenous presence. The first encounter with the indigenous populations was a collision of worlds. The reactions ranged from curiosity and exchange to fear and devastating conflict. Once ashore, exploration began immediately. The goals were clear: assess the territory, secure resources, and establish a permanent presence. Early exploration involved rudimentary mapping of the coastlines and a feverish assessment of available resources: timber, fertile land, and most importantly, potential sources of gold. Temporary settlements were quickly established, often simple fortifications and shelters designed to protect the explorers and serve as bases for further inland excursions. The Caribbean presented immense challenges: harsh tropical storms, unfamiliar diseases, and the constant threat of hostility, making survival a daily struggle for the newcomers. The coast was merely the gateway. True riches and control lay inland, necessitating deeper, more organized expeditions away from the security of the ships. Expanding exploration meant traversing dense jungles and rugged terrain, pushing the boundaries of known territory, and increasing the interaction with diverse native groups. The driving force was always the search for gold, silver, and other valuable resources that fueled the Spanish Empire's ambition and expansion across the globe. As territories were claimed, missions and early trade routes were established, linking new settlements to the Caribbean coastal hubs and back to Europe. The arrival of Spanish ships fundamentally reshaped the Caribbean, paving the way for colonization and the profound changes that followed. The Spanish presence resulted in a lasting cultural, architectural, and political legacy, visible across the Caribbean and mainland Americas to this day. From initial landing to vast colonial networks, the Spanish arrival in the Caribbean was a historical pivot point, defining the trajectory of the region for centuries to come. The mapping of the Americas was a monumental task, driven by the ambitions of the Spanish Empire. But how exactly did they chart these vast, unknown territories? Early Spanish efforts were critical, laying the groundwork for future geographical understanding of the New World. Conquistadors often kept detailed journals and created rudimentary sketches. These initial records were the first attempts to geographically document the new regions they encountered. To establish location, explorers relied on astronomy, particularly celestial navigation, and dead reckoning, estimating position based on previous location, speed, and course. Rivers and waterways were the highways of the New World, making their accurate mapping paramount for Spanish colonial aspirations. Key rivers like the Mississippi and the Rio Grande were vital. They provided routes for navigation, access to resources, and defined territorial claims. Specialized nautical and fluvial charts were developed to ensure safe passage, detailing depths, currents, and surrounding landmarks along these critical water routes. Moving inland presented new challenges. The Spanish also focused intensely on documenting mountains and the vast interior regions. Mapping mountainous regions, such as parts of the Rockies and the Andes, was extremely difficult, requiring innovative methods to record elevation and intricate landscapes. Mapping expeditions were also tasked with documenting valuable natural resources, agricultural lands, and the locations of indigenous settlements, crucial for resource exploitation and control. Spanish cartography didn't stand still. It continually evolved from basic field sketches to highly refined professional maps. The transition was marked by moving from rough, exploratory sketches to detailed, officially recognized maps, known as, quote, padrones, serving as master charts for the empire. Specific royal cartographers played an essential role, utilizing accumulated exploration data to create increasingly accurate and comprehensive maps of the American continents. The Spanish exploration and mapping efforts fundamentally shaped how the world viewed and understood the Americas. The maps produced by Spanish explorers provided the foundational geographical knowledge that influenced subsequent American mapping and territorial organization for centuries. From charting major rivers to surveying vast mountains, the Spanish meticulously mapped the unknown lands of America, leaving an indelible mark on world geography. This period marks the Spanish Golden Age, where immense resources were needed to fund the crown's ambitions and secure its dominance in Europe. The foundation for this empire was laid through daring early expeditions, navigating uncharted waters driven by rumor and promise. It all began with Christopher Columbus, whose 1492 voyage discovered the New World, opening the floodgates for Spanish exploration and colonization. The initial encounters were complex, marking the start of a profound cultural clash between the arriving Europeans and the diverse indigenous peoples of the Americas. The discovery of vast amounts of gold and silver quickly turned the conquest into a relentless scramble for riches, fueling the empire's growth. Central to this conquest were key figures like Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro, whose brutal and strategic campaigns defined the era. Cortés brought down the mighty Aztec Empire in Mexico, while Pizarro conquered the vast Inca Empire in Peru, seizing their accumulated treasures and land. The discovery and exploitation of rich silver mines, like Potosi in modern-day Bolivia, flooded the Spanish treasury, sustaining the empire for centuries. With gold and silver flowing, Spain began the formidable task of organizing and administering its newly acquired American territories. Spain established complex colonial systems, including viceroyalties, to govern the massive territories and extract resources efficiently. The Catholic Church played a crucial role, often accompanying the conquistadors to convert indigenous populations and cement Spanish spiritual authority. The introduction of the encomienda system enslaved and exploited indigenous labor, making the extraction of wealth possible. The Spanish conquest left an indelible mark, with vast consequences that continue to define the Americas today. The sheer scale of gold and silver transfer to Spain established it as the dominant European power for decades, though not without economic repercussions. Tragically, the conquest led to the devastation of indigenous populations through disease, war, and brutal exploitation. The fusion of Spanish and indigenous cultures, language, and political structures created the foundation of modern Latin America. The conquest remains one of history's most compelling and controversial chapters, driven by the eternal human desire for power and riches. Spain's conquest secured a monumental empire, permanently changing the global balance of power and yielding treasures that financed a golden age. These journeys quickly brought the explorers face to face with the diverse, established, and complex civilizations of the indigenous Americas, marking the true beginning of contact. The very first interactions were often marked by confusion and curiosity on both sides. Initial contact led to tentative exchanges of goods, as both cultures tried to understand the other. The primary drivers for the Spanish were the 3 Gs: the search for gold, the desire for personal glory and prestige, and the mission to spread Christianity, fundamentally shaping their approach to the new lands and people. Indigenous reactions varied widely, from initial hospitality and cautious welcome to deep suspicion and, eventually, fierce resistance as the intentions of the Spanish became clearer. Early trade involved the exchange of European metal tools and trinkets for indigenous foods, materials, and sometimes valuable items like gold. However, this early trade quickly became unequal. As Spanish ambitions shifted from exploration to conquest and settlement, the dynamics quickly deteriorated, paving the way for widespread conflict. The main catalysts for conflict were the Spanish demands for indigenous labor, the seizure of land and resources, and attempts to impose Spanish political and religious authority. Perhaps the most catastrophic factor was the introduction of European diseases like smallpox, to which indigenous populations had no immunity, leading to devastating depopulation and crippling resistance efforts. The Spanish possessed a significant military advantage due to steel weapons, armor, horses, and firearms, often allowing small groups of conquistadors to defeat much larger indigenous forces. Numerous battles defined this era, showcasing both Spanish aggression and remarkable indigenous resilience and resistance. Key examples include the conquest of the Aztec and Inca empires, as well as countless smaller but equally brutal skirmishes over territory and resources across North and South America. The consequence of these conflicts was the profound loss of indigenous life, land, sovereignty, and traditional ways of life, leading to the forced labor and establishment of colonial hierarchies. The conflicts of the 16th century laid the groundwork for centuries of Spanish colonial rule across vast territories. The Spanish established a rigid administrative and social system, incorporating the remnants of indigenous societies into the new colonial framework, largely through forced conversion and labor systems. Despite the violence, the era also saw significant cultural exchange, resulting in a lasting legacy of blended indigenous and Spanish traditions, languages, and architecture throughout the Americas. The story of the Spanish and Native Americans is one of dramatic contrast, from hesitant trade to brutal warfare that fundamentally shaped the modern world. This complex relationship serves as a crucial reminder of the costs of exploration, conquest, and the enduring resilience of indigenous cultures.